Let's get started. How did everybody like the show?
Loved
Good
it.
stuff. So these
Yep.
first, these early piano sets. Did anybody know these piano variation pieces? The without Opus 80 and Opus 34. A little bit? No, maybe. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, um, Beethoven, with his variation writing, obviously he incorporated into other works and piano sonatas, and that's why I'm doing a two-parter on the Master of Improvisation. This show focused solely
Okay.
on piano repertoire, and one later in, I believe, December, that is chamber music and some piano as well. But he wrote a lot of variation sets that were not published. A lot of them have without opus, and the one number 80 is done quite a bit, quite a bit. Um, I wanted to read a little passage, very small passage from Donald Francis Tovey. Do we know who that is or was? Tovey, musicologist, composer, conductor, British, very important guy of the 20th century. So he says, Beethoven's highest art in variation form is independent of the sonata. From his earliest display of pianoforte playing, the wonderful 24 variations on a theme by Regini, without Opus 65 from 1790, to his supreme variation work, the 33 Diabelli variations, he uses and transcends every older means of variation and adds his own discoveries. So he felt that these standalone variation movements were just vitally important works and better than the ones that he incorporated into pieces. Arguable. Um, the without Opus 80 is interesting in that most of those works were, the without Opus, he never published them at all. A lot of them were earlier works, some of them were later. But this one was actually published during his lifetime. He just didn't care to assign it an opus number. He just didn't think it was good enough. And there's a story, I wrote down the name. He was at the home of a piano maker named Streicher, and her daughter was playing this piece, and he said, "Oh, what's that?" And she said, "Well, that's yours. That's the set of variations." And he had no recollection of the piece, no recollection of it. So he just whipped this thing off, and compare this piece, which, you look at the title of a piece, this is you sitting down at a concert, 32 variations. Whoa. So, and the piece is what? I don't know, 8 minutes, 10 minutes. So he takes this theme that's just 8 bars, and it's really a chaconne. Does anybody know what a chaconne is?
Heard of it.
Well, the famous Bach D minor chaconne, but it's a musical form that's a variation form in a slow triple meter, and that usually has an ostinato bass, a repeated bass that goes on. So bum ba 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 ba. That's with this piece. He's not very strict throughout the variations with it, but this is a chaconne-like piece. So he's got this 8-bar theme, and then 8 bars, bam, and he just whacks out these variations, going all the way down, and then the last one, 32, is the long one. He extends it and puts a little coda in, and wraps it up. But this piece was written interestingly, around the time, it was written in 1806. So it was around the time of the Razumovsky quartets and the Fourth Symphony. So he is well hammered into his middle period when this little ditty pops up. And maybe you can understand why he didn't want to publish it. What did you think of the piece itself? I mean, did you think it was, substantive or?
Well, it's a lovely little piece. I mean, I can't believe I haven't heard it. At least if I've heard it, I don't remember hearing it. But it's a really nice short piece with lots of really interesting material. It's kind of amazing that he just totally discarded it or didn't care to publish it or didn't care to do anything with it.
And didn't remember it.
Yeah, I didn't remember.
I mean, it was so insignificant to him. I think it's a charming little piece. I really do. I think it's great to like break up a program with it too. We've interestingly enough, we've had it about 3 times in the last 20 years, and we were supposed to have it. Rafael Blehash on his program this fall was going to play it as well. So the piece is done quite a bit. Yeah, really interesting. And
But I
then
think, wouldn't you say, I think what I got from the question that, like, if you were to contrast it in terms of substance with the Rasimovsky's, while it exhibits his marvelous ability to take a small bit of music and to do remarkable things within transformations, it's I don't find that it's on the same level of profundity and memorable quality that the quartets have.
oh, without question. I mean, without question. I mean, this is almost like a little, you know, a palate, you know, something to change your palate, a little cookie or something between the meals to break up the other stuff. I mean, he's still inventive. I mean, you're right. You know, he takes that little thing and just goes crazy with it, with the rhythms and the ideas that he expounds upon. I mean, it's, you know, it does show his mastery of what I was trying to come across in the show, that he just could really do anything on the spot. What did you think of that story about that visiting
From the
pianist?
title,
Sorry, David.
that's very from the title that you gave the program, I had the impression, maybe it's just power of suggestion, that this theme of variations originated as an improvisation, that he actually had performed it and then got into his head to write it down because it was sufficiently impressive for that.
No, I was speaking more to the quality of how he was able to do this at the keyboard with anything. And we talked about how he incorporated, you know, building massive symphonies like the Fifth Symphony on a little bit of an idea. But there's, you know, name another composer in music history that has as many theme and variations in the canon that Beethoven has. And there's reason for it. It was a way for him to show off this brilliance and how you know, inventive that he could be with these themes. It's wonderful. And I was saying about the story about the visiting pianist. Is anyone familiar with that story?
No.
It's quite a famous one, as you can imagine. And in the Swafford book, he goes into greater detail than I did about this pianist. And Beethoven definitely thought the guy was a charlatan, and wanted to put him in his place, and did so. So it's very funny. I love that quote by Czerny about you know, how he would just laugh as he ended his flourish and just, you know, berate the audience, you know, you fools. It gives you a window into Beethoven's character and his playfulness. The second piece, the Opus 34, again, the piece we probably aren't familiar with, right? No.
Yeah, right.
It was published alongside the Opus 35 variations, which are far more famous, and those are the Eroica variations. And unfortunately, I didn't have that on the series. It was funny. Jeremy had done it Jeremy Denk had done it in 2011, but we didn't have it recorded. But the Eroica variations were far more famous than this set. I liken it to, you know, with the piano trios of the Opus 70 #1, the Ghost Trio, and the Opus 70 #2. The Opus 70 #2 never gets the proper attention that it should. But this piece was very, very important. Uh-oh, did I not mark the book? I did, okay. It's a passage from Swafford. Haydn and Mozart had used variations as inner movements of sonatas, even occasionally as a first movement. Now Beethoven lifted variations to weight and a finality which nothing needed to be said in a work. Oh goodness, I'm reading from the wrong text.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I didn't mark the book for that was 109. I apologize. Basically, he was saying that Beethoven, when he brought forth and he wrote the publisher. Oh, I have it here. Sorry, I did mark it. I just didn't recognize it. He's writing to his publisher. I'm sorry. Here we go. As my brother is writing to you, I am just adding the following formation. I've composed 2 sets of variations. Both sets worked out in quite a new manner, and each in a separate and different way. I would infinitely prefer to have them engraved by you, and under no other condition than for a fee of 50 ducats for both sets. Usually I have to wait for other people to tell me when I have new ideas, because I never know this myself. But this time I myself can assure you that in both these works, the method is quite new as far as I'm concerned. So he was speaking to the newness of the Opus 34 and the Opus 35 sets of variations. And in Opus 34, what he does that is unique is that each variation has its own key. So he's not going to, let's say, the relative minor or the dominant or anything. He's actually moving in a key progression, in a grander chord progression from each variation, from one to the next. And interestingly, they go down by thirds. It's not a tonic dominant relationship with this. So he starts in F, then he goes to D, then B flat, then G, then E flat, then C minor, which pivots back to F. C being it's a flat dominant of F major. So it's extraordinarily inventive what he's doing in Opus 34 here. Each one is its own being, but still based upon the theme. It's very, very interesting. And back in the day when the keyboard, because of temperament, the keys had certain qualities ascribed to them. Like the E flat would be more heroic, the C minor would be more tragic. So he's got this whole universe inside of this Opus 34, these 6 variations. It's fantastic. It's really, really wonderful. Does anybody know the only other variation set that has an opus in his canon?
Diabelli.
Oh, Doe, except for Diabelli. I'm batting 1,000 tonight. I think I need to get some sleep or something.
Kind of hard to accept the Diabelli, but
Like, no, I'm sorry, the Diabelli's wrong.
Is the one on God Save the Queen? Does that have?
No, that's without opus, and that's with cello. There's a piano piece, and it's the Opus 76, and it's the Turkish March, which he then uses later in The Ruins of Athens, which is Opus 113. So that's the only other instance of an opus with a firm set of variations from Beethoven. It's very interesting. So one could say,
I understand you to say that the God Save the Queen variation was cello.
The God Save the Queen, yes, cello and piano, isn't it?
I don't believe so. It's not the way I remember it. I don't think so.
I think it's just piano.
Is it just piano?
It's just piano. I think it's just piano.
Oy vey. Oy. Yeah, you're probably right. I'm sorry. I'm thinking Hail the Conquering Hero.
Yeah, the Judas Maccabeus.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking. I'm sorry.
That's what I'm based on Mozart.
That's what I'm thinking.
Right.
I did allude to the Opus 26 Sonata, and interestingly, that is a theme and variation in the first movement of the sonata. Again, Beethoven being very inventive in his form of the sonata. And actually in this sonata in particular, it's the A flat major sonata Opus 26, he doesn't have sonata allegro form in any of the 4 movements, which is kind of neat. But I thought I'd play a video performance for you from a pianist we know. Hold on. Here we go. Jonathan Biss. Here we go. First movement, A flat major, opus 26. What'd you think?
I am in awe of the way he can play the piano without making a mistake. All those keys he's hitting, I'm thoroughly impressed. But I started watching his hands do that. Wow.
That's why they all sit on the left side of the hall for the piano recitals.
Oh, okay, gotcha. So you can't see him.
You know, it's yeah, it's fascinating, especially, you know, you come to our hall and you sit up close and sit to the left and you see all that's happening on the keyboard. It's quite something. But what a charming movement.
Beautiful.
This charming, 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 charming. And it was, you know, the A flat, this one we had on the series once in 2008. And I was really surprised by that. I thought it had been on the series since I've been around, and I was really surprised that we didn't have it. So, well, what a lovely, lovely little sonata.
Beautiful.
Yeah. And that brings us a segue with Mr. Biss to the Appassionata, where I was a very, very bad boy on the radio show, and not resolving the second movement and going into the third movement. So apologies in advance. There was a reason for that, but it was also that I wanted to spend more time. I knew that 109 was going to be on the show, but I really wanted people to hear those first two selections. Everyone knows the Appassionata, but I really wanted people to hear those first two sets of variations. And Jonathan, once again, you know, such a simple, beautiful, plaintive melody and theme that you know, goes right into the storm, into the third movement. Just marvelous. I have a quote from Charles Rosen. Do we know who Charles Rosen was?
Yeah.
Pianist, thinker, writer. He wrote one of the most important books in classical music history, the Classical Style. I believe it was in 1970 or 71. And our own Jeremy Denk wrote a libretto, did an opera based on the Classical Style. You remember that? That was premiered in Ojai about 5 years ago. And I remember this was one of my trips driving Jeremy up to New York, and I got my ticket on the way back down from New York, that he was on the phone just scribbling this libretto and working. Oh, the composer. I can't remember the composer. That's terrible. He passed away young. Oh dear. Anyway, he was on the phone and they're trying to hammer out the libretto with the music and what was happening in this particular scene on the New York Thruway. It was kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing. But here's what Charles Rosen has to say about the Appassionata theme and variations. The most extraordinary part of the achievement is the feeling of release that comes with the return of the theme in its original form, and the resolving force of this recapitulation. Through this, the variation form loses its additive character and conforms to the dramatic and almost spatially conceived figures of sonata style. So it's interesting. So he's likening the tune coming back to sort of connecting it with sonata allegro form. And tying it all together rather than getting progressively further and further away from the theme, which was generally the practice. You know, theme and variation early on, it would get more and more complex. Each variation would go on and it would get, the texture would be thicker and thicker and thicker. And here's Rosen's statement, and we move to Opus 109 with Paul. What did we think about Paul's performance of 109? Not bad?
Not bad.
Okay.
It was very typical Paul Lewis.
Typical Paul Lewis.
Yeah.
So that particular concert, he did all three late Beethoven sonatas. And I knew of Paul. That was his first appearance on the series. And that was 2015, I think I said, yeah. And I didn't know him at all, actually. Just, I think I met him once through a friend. And then I sit down and, you know, I knew, of course, of his playing, you know, I knew of his playing. And then he just played the last three sonatas so beautifully. I mean, it was so incredible. I don't know, was everybody there, or do we remember that concert? John was there, David. I mean, really, really just one of those concerts where it's just almost too much. It was just amazing. And you hear that repertoire played that well. It's amazing. And the Opus 109 is sort of, I'd say that it just kicks off those fine, you know, the Hammerklavier is part of that group, but it's just, those three together are just so, you know, marvelous and inventive. And now I will read the correct passage from Swafford about the Opus 109. Here we go. Haydn and Mozart had used variations as inner movements of sonatas, even occasionally as a first movement. Now Beethoven lifted variations to a weight and finality beyond which nothing needed to be said in a work. In keeping with what came before in a sonata, these variations have mercurial changes of speed and texture and character, from introspective to jovial to baroquely contrapuntal. In the final variation, the music gathers into a shimmering texture of trills, conjuring something on the order of a divine radiance. The trills gather slowly in an ecstatic climax, then the finale concludes with the simple recall of the theme, the effect of which summons a future poet's line that we return from a journey to where we began and know the place for the first time. So as in Opus 57, Beethoven takes this theme and variation movement and it comes to a close. The trill is going, it keeps building, tension, and then this release happens, and this very quiet restatement of the theme to close this incredible sonata. I mean, it's so wonderful. You know, some programmers, and I can't say who, when programming, it's like, oh, we can't end a concert quietly. You need to send them out. You need to send them out with a bang. I'm like, you know, it's like, it's crazy. You know, like hearing the Shostakovich piano quintet, for instance, which ends very quietly. And I've never seen the house. I've always seen the house come down, you know, after the Shostakovich piano quintet. But it's such a remarkable sort of kicking off of these last three sonatas, which he completed. You know, he passed in 1828, and the Opus 109 is from 1820. So he had, by the time he was you know, older and you know, closer to death, you know, he returns and comes back to the Diabelli variations at the end of his career, and then as well as the bagatelles, the Opus 126, the bagatelles. But the sonatas end, you know, in the early 20s. I forget the Opus 111. I think these were written in quick succession, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah. So it's really, really remarkable. Any thoughts on 109 and that piece? You'll note that I avoided 111, which to me is such an incredible sacred theme and variation, you know, of that sonata, that if you see the Beethoven festival in its entirety, I close the entire festival with it. It's just that important and incredible, and still a theme and variation. You know, the universes that Beethoven traverses. It's fascinating. I mentioned in passing in the beginning of the show how Beethoven, you know, would also write cadenzas, and most famously in the Mozart number 20 in D minor, which is the standard cadenza for that piece. Do we all know what I don't want to assume. Do we all know what a cadenza is? It's that sort of moment when the orchestra pauses And then the soloist is supposed to improvise and do this flourish based upon the themes of the concerto. And then the orchestra comes back in to close out the movement. That's generally what happens. And back in the day, you know, Mozart, you know, he didn't write his own cadenzas. Our cadenzas attributed to him for his concerti, but he improvised all the concerti. You know, they were all great improvisers, and Beethoven among them. But I wanted to play a live performance of, hold on, let me pull it up here, of a certain pianist we know named Uchida, playing the end of the first movement of Mozart Concerto number 20 in D minor. And we're gonna pick it up at the recapitulation as we're going into the cadenza, because it just doesn't make sense to start right at the cadenza. So we're gonna start right at the recap. And this is with the Camerata Salzburg from about 19, 20 years ago. Here we go.
Thanks for sharing that. Wow.
I mean, just on its face, hearing her play Mozart is just, it's a gift. It's a gift.
I agree.
So Derek, whose cadenza is that?
That's Beethoven.
It's Beethoven, okay.
Yeah, hence that's why I played it. So yeah, so this is Beethoven wrote that cadenza for this piece. And what can you tell me about it? If you were to describe it.
Well, it beautifully summarizes the movement. I mean, the whole piece actually, but it's also Beethoven, not Mozart.
Oh,
Yeah, Mozart has his name on it.
I think I was muted. Yeah, I mean, it's Beethoven, not Mozart. It was interesting. Ben, I don't know if anybody else knows if Beethoven, if any other Mozart concerti have existing Beethoven cadenzas ascribed to them. Because off the top of my head, I couldn't think of a better Mozart concerto for Beethoven to kind of add to. I mean, it's so stormy and dramatic. I mean, that's one of the things that makes the number 20 stand out.
Pretty long.
Yeah.
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 It's almost like it's a piece within the piece.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a pretty substantial cadenza.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, it's got the edge of Beethoven. I don't want to say it's all out Beethoven, but it certainly has some flair in it. That's him. You know, but the character that he gets, you know, and uses again, developing the motives, David, that we speak a lot about, these little ideas in both those themes of the concerto. It's just wonderful, really, really wonderful. And there are other composers that have written cadenzas for Mozart concerti, and you know, Mendelssohn did it. That you hear that rarely. Brahms, you never hear. And interestingly, in Beethoven's own concerti, the only one that was first published with a written cadenza was the fifth, was the Emperor. And then later in life, he went back and and wrote cadenzas for the first 4, and actually offered the performer a couple options with cadenzas for each of those concerti. So it's very, very interesting that he would describe, you know, his own stamp on the tradition of cadenza, which was improvisation, that he would insist upon it in the Emperor Concerto, and then on second thought went back and added his own to the first 4. It's very interesting. Any
I know
other
the topic
thoughts?
is Beethoven, so slightly off-topic question. Does anyone play the Mozart D minor with an improvised cadenza?
Sure,
Did you know?
Bob Levin.
Okay.
Do you know Robert Levin? Yeah.
No, I don't.
Brian mentioned Robert Levin.
Okay.
Yeah, he's famous for it, and he'll get up and make an announcement that he will be improvising all the cadenzas that he plays. Any Mozart concerto he plays, he still improvises. Violinists tend to do it more than pianists these days. Play their own cadenzas. It happens. But Robert Levin is definitely the most pronounced one that does it. Any other thoughts? Well, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Great evening. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next week as we enter Beethoven's middle period.
Very good.
All right.
Sounds good.
See you next week, everybody.
Everyone.
Very
All right.
good.
So long.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for having us.